tenemos un experto en Bitcoin. Él se llama Saifedean Ammous. Saifedean Ammous. Saif es autor de un libro que se llama El patrón Bitcoin. Ha sido traducido en 24 idiomas. Saif es ingeniero y economista. Tiene una maestría en el London School of Economics y es doctor de la Universidad de Columbia. La primera pregunta, Ana, para el doctor Saif es si él pudiera calificar de 1 a 10, ¿qué tan seguro de 1 a 10 es el Bitcoin? Es decir, ¿cuál es el nivel de riesgo de tener una de estas cuentas de criptomonedas que en un momento pueda ser hackeadas y le desocupen al ahorrador su dinero? ¿Qué seguro de 1 a 10 es el Bitcoin?
Hello, Mr. Saif. Thank you very much for joining us today at W Radio. And let's speak about Bitcoins. If you had to grade Bitcoins from 1 to 10 in terms of the safety you have, bearing in mind the risk you can take if a hacker just, hacks a computer and ends up taking all the savings of whoever owns these Bitcoins. If you had to grade Bitcoin from 1 to 10 in terms of how safe it is to have your money invested in Bitcoins, how would you grade it?
Well, it depends on how we would set up the measure. What are we comparing it to? Are we comparing it to some ideal form of money, or are we comparing it to the actual alternatives that exist in the world today, which are monies provided by government, which have all kinds of problems, most important, of course, inflation, which I'm sure listeners in Latin America are very familiar with that problem. When you look at the track record of inflation, so even if your money might be easier to secure with banks, you think that it is simpler, and you still keep the money, it still loses much more of its value. And if you compare the value of national currencies over the last 10 years to the value of Bitcoin, I think it's quite clear which one is the riskier one to hold. So, of course, there are risks with Bitcoin, in particular risks with dealing and handling with Bitcoin. So I'm not going to say that Bitcoin is ideal, but when we take into account all the factors, including the inflation, I would say I would give the risks, I'd give Bitcoin maybe 7 over 10, and then I would give national currencies scores ranging from 0 to 4 over 10, basically.
Bueno, nos dice que depende de con qué se compare, si se compara con otras alternativas similares al Bitcoin o, por ejemplo, al dinero que da el gobierno, al dinero tradicional que tiene ciertos problemas como lo es la inflación, por ejemplo. Él dice que en Latinoamérica estamos muy relacionados con el tema de la inflación que nos afecta bastante. Entonces, él dice que si se mira ese dinero, ese factor de la inflación, el dinero puede perder también su valor con el tiempo, así lo tengas asegurado en un banco, así sientas que está más seguro en un banco. No va a decir que el Bitcoin es lo ideal, obviamente también tiene riesgos, y teniendo en cuenta estos riesgos que también tiene el Bitcoin, lo clasificaría de 7 sobre 10, cuando el dinero normal que se guarda en un banco, por ejemplo, 4 sobre 10 le daría de evaluación.
¿Por qué es tan difícil comprar Bitcoin a través de un banco? ¿Por qué ponen tantos problemas, piden tantos papeles? Dicen que el dinero, si se quiere mantener seguro, debe ir a una cuenta, Ana, en donde el Bitcoin no se puede vender antes de 6 meses. ¿Él cree que los bancos le hacen la vida imposible al Bitcoin?
Why, Saif, do you feel that it's so hard to buy Bitcoins through a bank? Some bank entities require that, lots of documents, and they make you hold the money there for 6 months. Do you feel that banks are, to an extent, trying to make it hard for people to get access to Bitcoins?
I think so. It depends on which country, but in general, central banks have placed restrictions on banks' ability to deal with it. But I think if you look at what has been happening over the last year, what we've seen is that ways of buying and storing Bitcoin have developed a lot all around the world, and in particular, what has improved most importantly is the institutional access to Bitcoin. So now it's becoming more common, and it's becoming much easier and safer and it is allowed by regulators for large financial institutions to hold Bitcoin. They have the custody solutions now available. So with these things happening, we're beginning to see a fast rise in the amount of institutions that are able to enter and use Bitcoin. And I think this will soon start getting reflected on central banks around the world as banks start finding ways of offering it easily, offering access more easily, I think.
Bueno, nos dice que cree que sí, depende mucho del país, pero en general los bancos han puesto ciertas restricciones, pero si se mira lo que ha pasado en el último año, ya hay muchas más formas de comprar y guardar Bitcoin. Digamos que esto ha venido evolucionando en el mundo, el acceso institucional ha mejorado y se ha vuelto mucho más común, fácil y seguro adquirir Bitcoins. Dice que ya está permitido por los reguladores y se empieza a ver cómo aumenta su uso y los bancos centrales en el mundo empiezan a ofrecer este acceso a los Bitcoins.
¿Él guardaría los ahorros de sus hijos y de sus nietos en Bitcoin o guardaría una parte? ¿Qué porcentaje guardaría en Bitcoins?
Mr. Saif, let's speak about, let's say you had this situation in which you had to put your money away, your savings away for your kids and your grandkids. What percentage of your equity, of your money, would you put away, would you save in Bitcoin, and what percentage would you save in another currency? How much would it be?
Well, I think, these calculations depend on each individual's preferences and risk assessment. And I'm not an investment advisor, and I can't really give these answers in a professional manner. But I think the important thing to think about Bitcoin is that if you're considering holding something for the long term, if you're thinking about savings for the long term, you are unable to find reliable instruments for doing this around the world today because everything is risky. National currencies are designed to lose value every year. That's what the central banks who make them, that's what they say. They want your money to lose value every year. And sometimes it's 1 or 2 or 3%, but sometimes it's much higher. And if you compare monetary inflation to asset inflation, you see just how much more expensive things are. Inflation is much higher if you compare it to the price of assets that people want to hold for the future. So holding assets is better than holding money, but it's still not very good because assets have a lot of bubbles, because a lot of people want to hold assets so their price can be highly overvalued and then they can crash. But Bitcoin maintains scarcity because nobody can make more than 21 million of it, because there's never going to be more than 21 million Bitcoin. You can have some assurance about how much it's going to, how scarce it's going to be in the future, and so you can be sure that there's not going to be an inflation of the supply. And this is proving to be a pretty good bet in the long run. So nobody who has held Bitcoin for more than 3 years has lost value, has found their Bitcoin lose value.
Bueno, dice que lo más importante de tener en cuenta una persona que quiera ahorrar a largo plazo es que no hay instrumentos actualmente para hacerlo seguro en el mundo. Digamos que todo tiene cierto riesgo. La moneda normal pierde valor cada año. Se espera que pierda 1, 2, 3% o más. Y vuelve al tema de la inflación, cómo la moneda se afecta por el tema de la inflación. Y dice que una persona que, por ejemplo, invierte en Bitcoin y lo guarda por más de 3 años, no ha perdido su valor. Entonces él cree que es importante tener en cuenta eso, y es que nada es seguro, pero no se atreve como a dar un porcentaje en específico porque no es un asesor financiero y hay que evaluar el caso de cada individuo para dar una respuesta. Pero lo más importante para tener en cuenta es que no hay nada en el mundo ahora seguro para invertir a largo plazo.
Hay quienes dicen que el Bitcoin va a llegar a costar $400,000, $500,000 por unidad. ¿Él piensa lo mismo?
There's some people that say that Bitcoin is going to end up being worth, $400,000 per Bitcoin, or even $500,000 per Bitcoin. Do you agree with that analysis?
I don't know the future, but I can certainly see why you would think that this is the case. I mean, if you look at the trend over the last 10 years, Bitcoin has gone from less than 1 cent, so less than 1/100th of a dollar, to $24,000. And that's an enormous move. So it's not out of the question for this move to continue from 20,000 to 200,000 and to 400,000. And I think what we're seeing is just a very large increase in the demand for Bitcoin over the last year from institutions in particular, as well as individuals buying from all over the world. And what we also have is a reduction in the supply of Bitcoin. So in this year, in 2020, the new production of Bitcoin went down from 900 coins per day to 450 coins per day. So we've already had a supply shock, and we're having a demand shock, and they're both heading in that direction. So it's not impossible that we could see 400,000. If not this year, next year, 5 years, 10 years from now, I think it is possible.
Sí, él lo ve posible, él cree que puede ser el caso, porque si hacemos el recuento de los últimos 10 años, ha subido de menos de 1 centavo a $25,000, entonces puede evolucionar a ese valor. Dice que por la demanda de las instituciones e individuos, dice que en el 2020 la producción del Bitcoin se redujo y también hay mucha más demanda, entonces puede ser el escenario viable en los próximos años.
Ana, Elon Musk de Tesla trinó hace un par de días sobre otra criptomoneda, la Dogecoin, y de pronto Dogecoin subió 20% después del trino de Musk. Mi pregunta es una burbuja? Es decir, lo que menciona Musk es como oro y la gente empieza a invertir en lo que él dice, o él cree que el Bitcoin aún es y será por muchos años la criptomoneda más fuerte?
I want to speak about another cryptocurrency. It's called Dogecoin. A couple of days ago, Elon Musk mentioned it in a tweet, and sometime later it went up 20%. Do you feel that whatever Elon Musk says just becomes gold because he said it, or do you feel that Bitcoin is going to be the strongest cryptocurrency for the next following years?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin is really the only cryptocurrency with staying power. I think all the other ones, the best that you can say about them is that they're interesting research projects that may one day find a use case. But currently they don't have a use case. The only digital currency that truly works is Bitcoin, because it is the only digital currency that doesn't have a group of people in charge of it. And so because of that, this currency is the only one that is able to be a neutral world money that anybody can use.
Dice que sí, él le apuesta al Bitcoin, dice que es la única criptomoneda que funciona en el momento porque no tiene, digamos, un grupo encargado, entonces le apuesta al Bitcoin para el futuro.
¿Se sabe de alguna estafa o robo en Bitcoins? ¿Es posible?
Do you know about any robs or any, people stealing any Bitcoins? Is it possible for something like this to happen, that, you have your Bitcoins and somebody steal them from you?
Yes, it can happen, and just like it can happen with any form of money, in that it's like physical cash, but it's on the internet. This is, I think, a good way to think about Bitcoin. There are coins that exist on the internet, and ownership of those coins is very real, like the ownership of physical cash. And so if you have the private key for your Bitcoins, then you are able to access your Bitcoins and you are able to send them and you have them. If you don't have the private key, if somebody takes your private key, they can take your Bitcoin. It's very simple. And so, well, it's simple to think about, but it's very complicated to think about the implications of it. But it can be stolen. It's a form of money, and just like any other form of money can be stolen, this one can be stolen too.
Sí, dice que sí puede pasar, como cualquier otra moneda, es como tener dinero efectivo pero en internet, entonces se le puede robar estas bitcoins así como una persona se le puede robar el efectivo que tenga.
Para una persona que no ha invertido aún en Bitcoin, ¿todavía está a tiempo o ya cree él que es muy tarde y que ya el que no se subió al bus se quedó fuera? Saif, do you feel that somebody that's not invested in Bitcoin, do you feel they still have time to go ahead and invest, or do you feel that the bus already left and it's already too late to try and take this level of risk?
No, I don't think it's too late at all. I think the way to think about Bitcoin is that the total addressable market of what Bitcoin can represent is far, far, far larger than where Bitcoin is right now. So currently, Bitcoin's size is around $400 billion. That's the size of the Bitcoin market. But if you think about a form of money that is hard and can hold value into the future, and think about how much demand there exists for that around the world, it's not just the demand that people have for holding cash, it's also the demand that people have for holding bonds and for holding a lot of financial instruments and a lot of stocks. And it's a demand that is also driving real estate. So if you think about what people buy today in order to save value for the future, they can't just hold money because they expect their money to lose value. So what are they buying? They're buying bonds, they're buying stocks, they're buying real estate. That's not really investment. That's not money that people want to take a risk with. It's money that they want to save, or at least a big chunk of it is money that they want to save. It's not investment, and I think there's a difference between saving and investment. Saving is just money that you want to keep safe for the future, but investment is money that you want to take risk with. And so for the money that people want to save, I think all over the world, there's an enormous potential for Bitcoin to satisfy that need, and this is a market of $200 trillion, something like that, between $1 and $200 trillion. So we're still very early compared to Bitcoin's potential. And I think the notion that Bitcoin is too late, I don't think it's accurate, because Bitcoin's supply is fixed. And so as demand for it increases, it can always accommodate more people, not by increasing the supply by making more Bitcoin, but by raising the value of Bitcoin to allow it to have more liquidity so that it can be held by many more people.
Dice que no cree que es demasiado tarde, dice que se puede pensar en el mercado que representa y es mucho mayor que el de ahora, puede ser de $400 mil millones, por ejemplo. Entonces es un dinero que las personas pueden invertir y que esto implica cierto riesgo. Estas personas que, por ejemplo, compran en bienes raíces o hacen su inversión en la bolsa, no están pensando realmente en invertir, que es una diferencia entre invertir el dinero y ahorrar. Están pensando en mantener su dinero guardado para el futuro. Al cambio, para él sí hay un mercado ahora mismo para el Bitcoin de personas que quieren invertir, lo cual implica tener un riesgo para tener ganancias en el futuro, y por eso él cree que hay un mercado bastante grande y el Bitcoin tiene bastante potencial en el futuro.
Ana, por favor, dígale que los antiguos todavía creemos en los bancos y creemos en la oficina y creemos en la señorita, creemos en el banquero, creemos en el gerente y creemos en el dinero que se puede tocar. Y resulta que el Bitcoin como moneda no existe, no hay oficina, no hay señorita, no hay nada. Es una moneda que ni siquiera sabemos dónde está, ni quién la guarda. Es más, no sabemos quién es Mr. Bitcoin. ¿Eso no produce desconfianza?
Saif, there's a big percentage of the population, mostly older population, that still, like to go to banks. They like to speak to the banker, speak to the manager, be able to touch the money. And, that doesn't happen with Bitcoin. Nobody knows where Bitcoin is. You can't buy it. Everything's digital. Doesn't that cause certain type of, skepticism or frightness towards people entering this world of Bitcoin?
I think one important point that I try to make in my book is that Bitcoin itself is likely not going to be a consumer facing technology, in that most people are not going to be using the Bitcoin network themselves to make payments. They're likely going to be utilizing second layer solutions that can be made to look in whatever way that is convenient to them, because basically Bitcoin allows us a free market in money. And so we will have banks and financial services develop on top of it, and they can provide individuals with the solutions that they want. So it's possible for you today to use a debit card that is backed by Bitcoin and just use it in all of the places that take credit cards and debit cards and just make payments with it, and it would take it out of your Bitcoin. There are some companies that provide a service like this. So everything that you like about your bank and your credit card can be operated on top of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is specifically about the monetary network. It doesn't replace your credit card and your bank. It's more about replacing the currency that your credit card and your bank are using. Instead of the currency being issued by governments, you have a currency that is issued by the internet, basically.
Bueno, nos responde que es importante tener en cuenta que todos los servicios que te presta el banco con la moneda tradicional se le puede prestar también al Bitcoin. Digamos que lo que cambia con el Bitcoin no es el servicio que te prestan, sino esa red monetaria que hay detrás. Es decir, que no va a ser controlada por un banco, sino por el Internet. Pero todo eso que le ofrece a Julio su banco, también se lo pueden ofrecer con el Bitcoin.
Una última pregunta, Ana. ¿Él tiene claro quién es Mr. Bitcoin?
One last question, Mr. Saif. Are you clear about who is Mr. Bitcoin?
No, nobody really knows, and he's disappeared exactly 10 years ago. It's been now 10 years and 1 week that he's been disappeared, and Bitcoin continues to work without him. It has worked for 10 years without him. It worked for about 1 or 2 years with him. So it doesn't really matter who he is.
Well, Mr. Saif, thank you very much for being with us today at W Radio.
Thank you very much.
No, nadie sabe quién es. Desapareció hace más de 10 años, hace 10 años y una semana exactamente, y el Bitcoin funciona sin él perfectamente. Solo estuvo presente por 1 o 2 años, entonces realmente para él no importa quién es.
Grace, ¿usted compraría después de esta entrevista un Bitcoin?
No, señor.
Ana, ¿usted compraría Bitcoin?
Sí.
Sí. Alberto, ¿usted compraría Bitcoin?
Sí.
María Camila, ¿usted compraría Bitcoin?
Sí, me arriesgaría, sí.
Michelle, ¿usted compraría un Bitcoin?
Sí.
Sí, yo creo que esta encuesta la hicimos, Alberto, hace unos años y
era
nadie...
totalmente distinta.